Everyone, and welcome to the final part of my top 150 favorite novels. And man, as I was getting the first stack of five from my shelf. Hey, who can figure out all five? Just from looking. Yeah, all five were. Oh, one of them's really hard to tell. I kept being like, damn, that was really really good, and I like, there's a level up here. Without any further ado, number 25 is 11/22/63 by Stephen King, which Ben got me to read recently, and I talked about in my first half update of the TBR competition. This book is so good. You're going to hear that sentence a lot. I will try and not get too repetitive as I look at four books that are so good next to me and know that I think the next 20 I like even more. This is a massive book that I think is objectively slowly paced and is also completely addictive. It reads so smoothly. It's such an inherently compelling narrative. The character writing is so excellent. Like, the way the small details are written, like the practical difficulties not being ignored of dealing with something like time travel for this, where it's like, it's like you hear time travel, it's like, would you go back in time and kill Hitler? It's like, okay, that might be kind of hard though. Like, a lot of people tried to kill Hitler, not with time travel, and they failed. And this, was probably less hard than that. But by not ignoring the practical details, it added so much tension, and also, like, it could have been a very focused novel that would have been worse, but then life interceded so much, and man, the past harmonizes stuff was so good. The conservation of history was so good. Incredibly emotionally powerful ending. Just such a good novel. I've now read 4 Stephen King novels. By the way, I have read The Green Mile as of filming this, but as with all the other TBR competition stuff, if The Green Mile was in my top 25, I would not have it. I'll say of the 3 I can talk about, this is by far my favorite. Moving on to number 24 is Seven Surrenders by Ada Palmer. I think this is the third Terra Ignota book I have on here. This one's pretty close to being my favorite, but not quite. Two Like the Lightning and Seven Surrenders, I think it was originally one novel, and this is it has basically all the same strengths of Two Like the Lightning, but when you read Two Like the Lightning, it's hard to know where things are going. I'll read a scene and I'll be like, man, that was really interesting. No, don't really know why this connects to the story, why this scene exists. In Seven Surrenders, it has all the same strengths of Ada Palmer just being a genius and incredible writing and just off-the-charts world building and amazing political scheming and very good character writing as well. But you understand where it's going, and just the density of interesting things is so insanely high. There's so many elements that it's like, oh, that would be interesting even in the simplified version. And Ada Palmer's going to then go with the complicated, more interesting version, and they're going to interact with a way that's just, it's delicious. Number 23, a novel you may have heard of, is A Storm of Swords by George R. R. Martin. This is going to be the next novel I reread. I'm really excited. So this it might end up moving. But yeah, Storm of Swords, how much do I have to say about Storm of Swords? It's, of all the series that I have seen, A Song of Ice and Fire is the one that has the most consistent consensus favorite book. Because, I think it's fair to say that the first 3 A Song of Ice and Fire novels are, amazingly plotted. They're very tightly plotted, great setup and payoff. And I think George probably gets better at character writing throughout the entire series. But then the last 2 books get a little loosey-goosey. This is where it all comes together. There's a reason I think season 3 and 4 of Game of Thrones are not as good as an adaptation as season 1, but they're Storm of Swords, which is why they're my 2 favorite seasons of Game of Thrones. And there's a reason most of the amazing scenes in like that series of television are just taken from A Storm of Swords. It's got a moment that's in contention for the most iconic moment in fantasy fiction. It has a character arc that is in contention for the best one-book character arc in fantasy fiction. While having amazing world building, fantastic line-by-line writing, great character work across the board. I mean, it's Storm of Swords. Yeah. Anyway, this is how much I like the books up here. Like, these are all above. Actually, no, these are still, I technically have. Yeah, I have these at 9.5. These are all, like, all-time favorite novels. Number 22, I have Perhaps the Stars by Ada Palmer. I found this hardback in a random bookstore in Squamish the other day. It's first edition. Great bookstore. I think it was called, like, the Book Mountain. If you're ever in Squamish, BC. One of the best selections in a bookstore that I've ever seen. It was, like, combination used and new, just, like, next to each other. Anyway, Perhaps the Stars, like, every other chapter, Ada Palmer would do something, and I'd be like, I didn't know you were allowed to do that. Like she just does stuff that I didn't even know was an option. Like, is that legal? It's got to be one of the most ambitious series and unique series that I've ever read in my entire life. It's hard to talk about within it because it's the fourth book of a series, as I've had a problem with for a lot of final books. But it truly has some of the most ridiculously genius pieces of writing that I have ever encountered, while just doing stuff that, like, I didn't know you were allowed to do. Like, if you told me, it would be like, that's not a thing. Like, no one's gonna like that. But then I read it, and it's some of the best plot twists and reveals. It has an antagonist who, like, there are a lot of antagonists in fantasy where you read them and it's like, oh, that's an impressively conceived motivation. Like, that's well written. Like, I can see that why this person believes something. Like, one of the antagonists in this was, like, so convincing that despite them being an antagonist for, like, the entire novel and me being like, I hate them, when I heard their side, like, they almost, like, legitimately convinced me. And then I was convinced back. We're moving on. Number 21 is Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, the second book in the Farseer trilogy. Many people's favorite book in the realm of the Elderlings. I mean, it's Robin Hobb, so it has the off-the-charts character writing. It's got a ridiculously incredible ending, really good political scheming. This was, I had a couple minor criticisms of this book the first time I read it, and then in between reading it and rereading it, Robin Hobb must have just edited my edition, and just on reread, it's like, oh, look, she addressed every criticism I had the first time. That's interesting. I kind of thought that one of the antagonists had plot armor, and I didn't buy that the story made sense from his perspective, but I actually think rereading it, the story does make sense from his perspective, and actually, like, is a really important bit of perspective writing on how, I've thought of this as an example when comparing this antagonist to other similar characters and how Robin Hobb does it better. Also, I think Fitz's character voice is just so strong, and the line-by-line prose writing is so incredible. And it introduces the best animal companion that has ever existed in fantasy or sci-fi, and it's not even close. Next one's going to be a spicy one after having Storm of Swords in the previous one. You guys can probably figure out what it is if you quickly look at my bookshelf. I'm sure there won't be any snotty comments about how it's ridiculous to have this book after having not a single comment of that nature throughout this entire series. Let's see how predictable you guys can be. Let's see how predictable the annoying guys can be. Anyways, I don't care. I will speak my truth. And number 20 is Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. The first 9.6 out of 10, meaning the description of one of my favorite books of all time was not quite positive enough for it. This is one of the craziest. I mean, it's not really a final act to a series. This broke the formula of the Stormlight Archive, which I get some people were not a fan of because they liked the formula, and I like the formula too, but we done the formula 4 times, and this broke it so brilliantly. There's always a trap that you hear authors talk about where they have to balance surprising people with paying off the things that they foreshadowed. And I have very, very rarely seen a book do both as well as Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson, where the stuff that like people were theorized was like, okay, the foreshadowing leads to this is what it's going towards, happened, but they happened in a way that was so unexpected that it still ended up surprising us. The final act of this was so good. It took Adolin and it made him one of the most ridiculously good Sanderson characters. It was cinema. It was thrilling. I was at Dragonsteel when I read some of this, and I knew I would be getting up at like, not early, but like reasonably early to go do stuff anyways, and it still kept me up to like 3 a.m. reading, and that wasn't even one of the parts that I would consider close to the best parts of Wind and Truth. Like, this is crazy because when I was reading the pre-release stuff, I had like the arc for the pre-release, I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. And then in my head, like, that part is very distinctly the worst 2 days of Wind and Truth. But like on my own, when I was done it, I was like, this was amazing. So anyway, 9.6 out of 10. Next up, we have Fool's Quest by Robin Hobb. This is actually, of the Fit series, this is my favorite middle book. Royal Assassin, The Golden Fool, and Fool's Quest are all reasonably close together. I think this has the single best happy moment in the Realm of the Elderlings. Like, Realm of the Elderlings has a lot of brilliantly written, like, sad or tragic moments, but this is, like, I think my favorite triumphant moment in the entire series. My perception of this book also just seems to be different from, like, most people who read it. A lot of people read Fool's Quest, and they're like, wow, nothing really happened in that book, but, like, it was really good. If you could read my review, I thought it was one of the most, like, tightly paced, clearly eventful novels in Realm of the Elderlings. It's going to be really interesting to see what I see on Goodreads. And also, obviously, it's got all the normal Hobb stuff, character writing, dialogue, prose, atmosphere is still off the charts. Number 18, Battleground by Jim Butcher. We are almost to the last Jim Butcher book. This book is pure insanity. This takes... man, it's hard to talk about what happened in this book. So this is... This book is centered around a battle, but also I think has the highest density of incredible character writing in any of the Dresden novels. I also just distinctly think the line-by-line writing is better in this novel. I've read it, I think, 3 times now. And each time I read it, like, every page, I'll notice multiple sentences and be like, damn, that was a fire sentence, which is not something that I typically associate with Jim Butcher. The banner arc. I have an interview with Jim Butcher, and I had to tell him that, like, whatever you cook, like, whatever was going through your brain when you came up with including the banner, that version of it was so outrageously good. Some of them, like, it has like, sometimes, I'll just be sitting around and I'll be like, damn, that scene in Battleground was like, that was really fucking good, man. But it does get beaten out slightly by Changes by Jim Butcher. You just gotta wait until you get to Changes, and this gets the number 17 spot. I actually think Battleground is the more impressive piece of fiction, and I think it is... Oh, I forgot to mention Christmas Eve, the epilogue about it, and the falling action was so good. Okay, but Changes, this is the most... like, personally compelling story of the Dresden Files. This is Harry Dresden at peak character tension, peak desperation. This is so good that it tells you that it breaks the formula. This is one of the most hyped novels you will ever get to while reading a series, where it's like, it's the 12th book in a series, and people will get to it, and they've been hyped it up for 12 books, and then it's not overhyped. Like, the book tells you... I remember... I was reading through the Dresden Files, and I did not pay attention to it, so I didn't know the Changes was crazy. And I was just going through the books, and I was like, okay, title. And I get to the next one, And I'm like, and for those who don't know, all the Dresden Files titles are 2 words with both words being the same number of letters, and then it just changes. It's like things are about to change. This was the culmination of 12 books of setup, and the Dresden Files will never be the same and cannot ever be the same after this. Number 16, the first book to get a 9.7 out of 10 is Speaking Bones by Ken Liu. This has a plotline in it that is so unbelievably good that it makes me forget that the rest of the book is also almost entirely unbelievably good. One thing that helps this is Ken Liu clearly finds a lot of the same things as me interesting. So there's a lot of like really creative problem solving in this to go along with some of the best non-Robin Hobb character work that I have ever read. I mean, there's a character in this book who like is one of my favorite smart characters. A lot of my favorite characters are kind of dumb. The main character in this book has is big brain, 200 IQ. Like, you know the like A Song of Ice and Fire theories where it's like, this is the Dornish master plan. This book has someone's master plan, but they actually completed it, and it's so good, and it leads to 2 of my favorite chapters in fiction. If you go find my Speaking Bones updates on Goodreads, like, I read chapter 50, and I wrote, I'll be damned if chapter 50 is not one of the best chapters I've read in my entire life. And then chapter 54, I think, is even better. This could legitimately contend for, like, the top 5 if Kutan Rovo did not exist. Because, unlike the previous 3 books, I do have criticisms for Wind and Truth, but Kutan Rovo is an antagonist in this book, a minor antagonist, who gets way too much page time for being one of the most incredibly uninteresting antagonists that I have read. That is an antagonist who has plot armor. So it's still a completely genius novel and one of the best endings I've ever read, obviously, by it being my final book in a series, and it's my 16th favorite book of all time. But this could have been even higher. This was in 2022 where I had this big old race for my second favorite book of 2022. One we'll get to. It's high. There's a bunch more books. But 2 was between like Wall of Storms, Soldiers Live, Kingdoms of Death, and it was pretty close. And then that became a race for 3rd because of Speaking Bones. Next up, in the number 15 spot, is a novel I've read, I think, 7 times. And it is a novel who defined who I am as a reader. This was a novel that when I read it, it was my favorite book of all time. I haven't said that in a while, and you might think I wasn't keeping track, because I said it when I read, like, Final Empire was my favorite book ever when I read it, and then Well of Ascension was, and then Hero of Ages was, and then, like, Cursor's Fury was, and then this novel was, and then we haven't gotten to any of the other novels that I've spent any time as my favorite book ever. Anyway, it is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, the opening book of the Stormlight Archive, centered around my favorite character in the Stormlight Archive. And this is still my favorite Kaladin book. Every time I reread it, I like the flashbacks even more. I'm like, are the flashbacks the best part of the first book? They're so good. It introduces such a ridiculously compelling world. It is so insanely addictive for how objectively slow-paced it is, which, I mean, is a reoccurring theme on here. But, like, I can read this. I forget if I've read this, like, 7 times. I should check. I have it down. We're going to check this live. It should say on Goodreads. The Way of Kings. And, like, if I pick this up to reread it for my 8th time today, I will be up till 2:30 a.m. despite having work tomorrow, because I will be reading The Way of Kings. Which, like, what greater compliment can you give to a book than being like, yeah, I can read it 8 times. So it would be my 9th time reading it, and it's still going to completely encapsulate my mind the same way it did the first time I ever read it. It's the first Stormlight Sanderlanche, so it has one of my favorite ends to a novel. that like choice being made, the setup of I don't want to say more because I mean probably a lot of you have read Way of Kings, but I'm not going to spoil Way of Kings. Like the novels where I'm happy to spoil are like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and that's basically it. But the entire setup and payoff and Sanderlanche of that final act, like I think the first time I read it, I then reread the final, like just the end, probably 10 times. Completely absurd. Anyway, moving on to number 14 is The Lions of Al Rassan by Guy Gavriel Kay. This is still a couple more Guy Gavriel Kay books, still a couple more Brandon books as well. This is a lot of people's favorite Guy Gavriel Kay books. It was like the second one I read, and it's up there for me. It is a completely good choice. I actually read this. I was stuck at an airport. I read this in PEI, where they'd lost our bags, and the airport was like, we were like, okay, so we can pick them up tomorrow. And they were like, well, there was some reason like we couldn't pick them up unless we were actually at the airport when the bags arrived. So like, I was like, I got Lions of Al Rassan. I'll just wait here and read. And I forget what my family did, but I waited outside the airport, and it's a good thing I was reading the Lions of Al Rassan because I distinctly remember being on chapter 2 and being like, how is this already so good? So it's Guy Gavriel Kay, so it has absolutely peak line by line prose. It's got the final chapter of this book, not the epilogue, but the final chapter definitely is a contender for my favorite chapter in the history of fiction. I've gone over a couple that are that, like, I actually think even more so than some of the next books. I think these have some of the highest highs, because, like, chapter 19 of Lions, chapter 48 of Changes, and chapter 54 Speaking Bones are all, like, in contention. It's very sprawling in terms of character work, but it's so easy to keep track of who's who because of how incredibly they're written. Like, this actually could be even higher. I think it might even have my favorite Guy Gavriel Kay chapter. I think part 3, like, this is one where the start of this book is incredible. It's ridiculously amazing. It moves the plot forward so well. It introduces all the characters. There's so much heart. There's so much, like, emotional depth to it. And then, like, the middle of the book is very good, but I like distinctly less. And then starting for, like, chapter 14, just, like, each chapter keeps getting better. And it's, like, it's truly unfair how many things he's good at, where he's not just a brilliant prose writer who can write people's internal monologues so well. He's also, like, have a ridiculously tense, badass action scene. So that's 14. Number 13 is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, which was my favorite book of 2024. It's been a while since you saw Patrick Ness. It's still ridiculous to me that this is how good as it is. Like, this stands out looking at my list compared to the others. I think anyone can read this. Any age. I think it's technically a YA novel, but you can read it, and you can get something from reading it. I read this in a day. Finished it at, I think, 12:07 a.m., which if you read it, that's the relevant time in the novel. One of the, like, that's creepy, man, that I finished at 12:07. Like, that's such a wild coincidence. Those of you who haven't read it don't even know what I'm talking about. It's a novel where it's as fantasy as you want it to be. You can interpret it as metaphorically or as literally as you want it to be. If you read this and don't cry, there's novels I read where I teared up. I think I teared up reading Way of Kings most times. Teared up reading Lions for sure. Might have even cried for Lions, but mostly I would say teared up. Felt the catharsis, like the physical sensation in my chest. But like, last time I reread this, I read the final chapter on a bus, and I felt the catharsis on my chest. But if I read the final chapter of this on a bus, it would have been embarrassing, because I was, like, actually crying. So good. Number 12 is The Gathering Storm by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. I think people forget how much I like this book, because I've only read it once, so I don't talk about it as much as the books that I've reread over and over again. And also, I read it longer ago than, like, all the books above it or in this range, I either read more recently or I've read multiple times. But this is my favorite Wheel of Time novel. Pretty comfortably. It's got my favorite Wheel of Time chapter. It's got my it's got one of the best one-book character arcs that I've ever read, and it's got a second completely insanely good one-book character arc. This is another one where it's like it actually has a distinct flaw, which is I think Matt's character voice was not written as well as it could have been. But it's got, like, I forget what chapter it is. Like, whenever people get to it, I'm like, sorry, man, you're not going to sleep. Let's see if does this have the chapter list? I wish I had the entire set in this floppy paperback. They're so nice. Let's see. Once you get this book, it's 50 chapters. When you get to chapter 39, you ain't sleeping, son. Also, chapter 39, I don't think it is my favorite plot twist ever, but like, if I have a short list of, like, if I ever made a top 10 plot twists I've ever read, this would be up there. Like, those are some fucking wild chapters. And then Veins of Gold, I think, is my favorite chapter in the entirety of Wheel of Time. Beating up by one spot. Number 11, The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb. I really recently reread this, and it didn't change spot at all. Live Ship Traders is my favorite series of all time, and this is actually, I mean, this is the first book. Let's put it this way. This is how much I love Live Ship. This is book 1 of the Live Ship Traders. You may have noticed that on this entire sequence of videos, I haven't mentioned either of the other Live Ship Traders books. So yes, this is my 11th favorite book of all time, and it is my least favorite book in the Live Ship Traders. It's so good. Like, I was reading this recently, and it's just like almost every chapter, I'm just like, this is the dynamics between characters are so absurdly good. It's also got a truly incredible one-book character arc. I think compared to Ship of Magic, my two favorite characters in Ship of Magic, I like slightly less here, but kind of everyone else jumps up a little bit. It's a very Kennett-heavy novel, who is like one of the most psychologically complex characters that I've ever read. He might be the most psychologically complex character I've ever read. Hate the dude. He sucks. But he's so interesting. Just everything about the way he sees and interacts with the world. This is a novel that has had a disproportionate impact on who I am as a person compared to almost any other novel. There are some lines in this that Amber tells Brashen that I will, like, when I am in a situation where it's very obvious what the right thing to do is, but the right thing to do is annoying, I will quote it at myself. The boredom, the messiness, and the inconvenience that is doing what is right. Yeah, that's what it's about. It's not about when the path is hard but glorious at the end. It's about enduring the boredom, the messiness, and the inconvenience of doing what is right. Very true words that Brashen needed to hear, and I think a lot of people need to hear, and that I tell myself. Okay. Hi, cat. Are you meowing at me? Number 10 is my favorite standalone novel of all time. It's actually technically not a standalone, but it's a novella. My favorite standalone novel of all time, and it's A Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gavriel Kay. We're almost at my favorite Guy Gavriel Kay book. Not quite yet. This is one of the novels that I could most immediately tell was going to be an all-time favorite. Like, sometimes it takes a little bit to be like, oh, this is going to be one of the best books I've ever read. And this one, it took me till about, I would say, on page 6. Like, if I had to predict, I would have been like, yeah, it's going to be one of my favorite books ever. And this is because Guy Gavriel Kay unleashes his powers upon first-person narration. And sometimes, like, first-person narration just feels more personal. And Guy Gavriel Kay, I think, is the best line-by-line writer that I've ever read. And he's at the absolute, utmost peak of his powers for my line-by-line writing. Like, I almost think his line-by-line writing in Brightness is like a noticeable step up from most of the novels he's written, which is wild, because I thought he was the best line-by-line prose writer I'd read before reading A Brightness Long Ago. And he just, in first person, it just hits so insanely different. The setup for this novel is so incredibly good. So I know I haven't said what a single novel was about here. Am I breaking that streak? Yeah. So it's from the perspective of an older man reminiscing from when he was in his like early 20s and some of the more eventful moments of his life, and how he had gotten basically blessed with good education and ended up working for like a ruler of a city. It's set in like a world based in the Italian Renaissance, who was like really effective but also like pretty overtly terrible. Like he would kill people, like pretty sadistically, and people tolerated him because he kept food on the table and he stabilized. And this person, he was friends with the person who would guard this ruler's door, who would stay outside the door. And he kind of said, like, you know, despite the fact that this person guarded the door of this horrific ruler, it was someone he deeply respected and thought was a good person, which, like, you can believe is a contradiction, but this is what he believes. That's kind of what he says. And he sees someone walking in who he recognizes, and because of who he knows they are, he knows they're there to assassinate the person. And he starts by talking about, like, he knew at the time that if the person was assassinated, this would lead to the person who guarded the door, who he respected, being killed, and the guilt he had over that choice. And then it just gets better. So yeah, Brightness, we're moving on, but it's, I mean, I know I've just been completely overwhelmingly positive about all these novels, but that's because they're my favorite novels ever. Moving on to number 9, which is Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. Yes, there's been a lot of Robin Hobb. There's going to continue to be a lot of Robin Hobb, given that this is not even in contention for my favorite book by Robin Hobb, and it's my 9th favorite book ever. We are inside the top 10. This is the completion of the Tawny Man trilogy. This man, this is an emotional roller coaster. I mean, I don't know how many more times I can say that I think Robin Hobb is the best character writer I've ever read. A lot of people have said that if the series ended here, they would be content, and I would be right among them. I thought it was basically a perfect ending when I read it, and then I started reading the last trilogy, and I was like, oh wait, I forgot about all this stuff. Never mind. This all series has to exist. Especially like the middle and end of this book is so ridiculously good. It's very involved with a lot. There's like the Fitz cast of characters. A lot of the characters who surround Fitz, almost all of them have a part to play in this novel, and almost all those parts are genius. We are moving on to number 8, which is The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. I'm sorry, I can only talk about the Hobb books so much at this point. So The Emperor's Soul, I've read this book twice. Both times I picked it up kind of randomly, haphazardly, on a whim. Both times I then forgot about the world outside of these pages, read it in one sitting, and then cried because of how beautiful it was. I don't know if there's any other words I could say that mean more than that. Number 7 is a book that nothing happens in for about 90% of it, and that is the best slice of life book that I have ever read, Fool's Assassin by Robin Hobb. Are we getting tired of Robin Hobb yet? I told you there would be a lot of Robin Hobb. So Fool's Assassin, as addictive as morphine is the cover quote, which is wild because nothing happens. It's one of the slowest paced books I've ever read, and yet it's my 7th favorite novel ever because it's going to be repetitive, but the prose and character writing is so absurdly good. There's a line in this book that meant enough to me that I quoted it at my grandmother's funeral. Yeah. Anyway, number 6, Ship of Destiny. Final book of the Live Ship Traders. I mean, this is getting repetitive, right? It's by Robin Hobb. I told you guys, I've warned you guys, the trend of how much Robin Hobb is going to be. It's the final book of the Live Ship Traders, the culmination of the trilogy that changed who I am as a person more than any other. And eventually the series that changed who I am as a person more than ever. But this is the culmination of my favorite chunk of that series, my favorite sub-series of Realm of the Elderlings. And I think it's genius. This is the book that I've never actually thrown a book in rage. I've thrown a book ironically while filming a video, but while reading a book, this has never happened. It's never happened where I let go. This is the book that came the closest to being thrown. And it came the closest to being thrown multiple times. There's a character from this book where if we never got their perspective, like, I've taught, it's Kenneth, who's like one of the main characters in the series, who's very manipulative. And he's so good at being manipulative that he tricks me multiple times when I'm reading him from other characters, which is embarrassing because I've been in his head and I know he's manipulative. Like, if I was in this world, like, it's hard for me to, like, I would love to believe that I would see through Kenneth's bullshit, but speaking objectively, I don't think I would. And that's a tough look in the mirror. But I think the books that make you really look at yourself in the mirror and make you realize, not necessarily that you should be harder on yourself, but you have to be careful when you're really sure about something. And that is what this book did. Okay, top 5. Here we go. Number 5 is another book I've read 8 times. And this is the book that has had the longest run as my favorite book of all time. This was my favorite book of all time for 7 years. I read it in 2014, and it didn't lose its spot until 2021. It's Words of Radiance. Probably not a shock to anyone. Words of Radiance is one of the most successful fantasy books that has ever been written. It is not a hot take to say that it is one of my favorite books of all time. I think it has like a 4.7 something on Goodreads with multiple 100,000s. Let's have a lookie. But yeah, it's incredible. I mean, the entire part 3, part 4, part 5, 1, 2, 3 punch that, like, arguably keeps one-upping each other. I kept rereading. The first time I read it, I kept 4.76. Did it go back up? I feel like it used to be 4.8, and then I think it got all the way back down to 4.74, and I think it's back up to 4.76. Anyway, I reread the last part of this book literally dozens of times after I first read it because I was obsessed with it. It more than anything else made me think that I just want more of this. It made me think that this was just my favorite style of book, which I think I do like this style of book, but you can see from the books surrounding it that I probably like slightly quieter books, slightly more, but this book was so good that it made me believe that my preference was just this stylistic preference because I liked it that much. Man, the flashbacks are good too. They're so good. And I think what drives it up from Way of Kings and from the books after it draws the line of, like, Way of Kings, the main characters are, like, mostly all separate. And then for the rest of the series, all the main characters have known each other for most of the series. This is the book where all the main characters meet each other, which I think was such an exciting, dynamic, and well-done place to be. I think the friendship between two of the main characters is one of my favorite, like, relationships in the Stormlight Archive. So yeah, I mean, not exactly shocking. And by the way, leather rounds. Look at them. I've said this before, but if Subterranean Press did these, they would cost $2,000. And I would just like to emphasize again that is, like, 100% true. Like, look at these. There we go. Michael Whalen. Good stuff. Number 4 is a book that, this was never my favorite book ever, but this was a book for a while I had 3 books 10 out of 10, and this was one of them. By the way, I forgot to say what score we're at. Words of Fool's Fate was the first 9.8 out of 10. Words of Radiance is the first 9.9 out of 10. So next book, also a 9.9 out of 10, is Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb. When I first read this, I think I gave it a 9.6, but I literally just kept thinking about it. And, like, I would still feel the echo of the emotion anytime I considered the events of this novel. It is in the first 200 pages, nothing happens, and it's incredibly brilliant. Like, after the Farseer trilogy, when I first read it, and then the Live Ship Traders, Fitz was like my 10th favorite Robin Hobb character, maybe. Might have been outside the top 10. Like, it would have been like Fool, Verity, Wintro, Althea, Kennet, Malta, for sure. Paragon, for sure. Ketrican, Night Eyes. Maybe like Ronica as well. In the range of top 10. And then I read the first 30 pages of this novel. And I was like, oh, Fitz is going to be maybe even the first 10. I was like, Fitz is going to be my favorite character of all time. Like, this is the best character I've ever read. Like, I know I'm going to have 6 more books in first person from him, which is part of the reason I believe that. Like, he's not going to be my favorite character ever after this book, but this is going to be the best character and the character I'm the most invested in that I've ever read. And I was right, and it's not even close. And the fact that I could tell, like, 10 pages into this book, it's it might be Hobb's best first line. He came one late, wet spring and brought the wide world to my doorstep. Ooh. All right. Number 3 is Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. I took a long break after reading the Farseer trilogy. This is the next novel that has spent some time as my favorite book ever. It did not spend long, but it unseated the longest reign of Words of Radiance. And I was the Sanderson guy before I read this. Now I'm kind of the Hobb GGK guy. But when I read this, I was the Sanderson Jim Butcher guy. And I just finished Malazan, Book of the Fallen, which I really, really liked. The book I read before this, I read The Crippled God, and then I read Red Sister. And I loved Malazan. It was like, this is awesome. Then I read Red Sister. I was kind of like, okay, I mean, that was fine. And then I think I commented 200 pages into this. Like, I'd been told Ship of Magic had a really slow start, and I was more excited to get back to Tawny Man. And, like, the first 100 pages, I was like, this might be the best start to a series that I've ever read. Like, the character work and the writing is so next level. So I think I commented on Discord. Someone was like, oh, how's Ship of Magic going? And I'm like, Ship of Magic, I could say Ship of Magic is going well, but it was like, Ship of Magic is going so well that the Stormlight Archive will probably not be my favorite series in 2 weeks. And at the time, Oathbringer, which as you all might remember is my least favorite Stormlight novel, was like my 9th favorite book ever. So, man, the tension in this book, like, I have trouble picking my favorite moments for this book because there are like 50. And yeah, and it made me realize that Robin Hobb is going to be my favorite writer. And then she didn't disappoint. Although it ended up being like, I was curious because this is not in very many people's like top 2 Robin Hobb books. It's my 2nd favorite. Yes, there are 2 spots left. This is my 3rd favorite book ever. And I was wondering if on reread it would kind of like equalize with the pack and it would move down to still be like a 9.6 or 9.7 or something. But then I read it and I was like, nope, everyone else is crazy. This book is ridiculously, absurdly, completely, outrageously amazing. And yes, it is my favorite novel in the Live Ship Traders. Number 2, this is a book that is the first book I'm giving a 10 out of 10. On some days, this is my favorite book ever. On most days, it's not. On most days, it's second. But there are days where if someone asks me, hey, what's your favorite book of all time? I will answer, it's Lord of Emperors by Guy Gavriel Kay. So, Lord of Emperors. Pros, yes. Cons, no. This is a book that is both at the same time about the little people living their day-to-day lives and grand sweeping events, and it does both so absurdly well. It literally has a chariot race that I've described reading as a spiritual experience. Like, it's a chariot race that has so many lines that are like truly makes you consider how many moments throughout history like were all perceived only live on in people's memory, and that like live differently in it. Like, there was one chariot race and it happened, if 5,000 people were watching, it happened 5,000 times because it happened differently for all 5,000 people, and not a single one of those 5,000 people accurately saw the chariot race. And the chariot race was thrilling, and it was beautiful, and it was art. And it is art that only lived on for one instant and can never be recovered. And in that instant, it lived 5,000 lives. And then all 5,000 people's memories changed for it. And it slowly evolved and changed. And people might have talked with the other people and changed their version to meet those other people's. But the actual truth of the event was just this transitory moment that can never be recovered. This novel made me more emotionally invested in a symbolic piece of artwork than other novels have made me invested in their entire cast of characters combined. This novel does not have a character list, and it POV hops and time hops and goes non-linearly like an absolute madman. And at no point did I forget who like anyone was, because like everyone stands out so much for how well written they are. So like how could I possibly forget them? The writing is so gorgeous. It's otherworldly. Introduces a brand new character on chapter 1, never seen in book 1. By the end of chapter 1, that was one of my favorite characters in the series, and it's one of my favorite series. It has tension, it has drama, it has plot twists, it has scheming, and it truly might be the best book that I've ever read. But there's one book that is my favorite book on more days than Lord of Emperors, and that is Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. The culmination of the Realm of the Elderlings and the journey of a character who, at this point, I feel like I know better than I know actual people. Like, I think at the 3/4 mark, I was like, this book is brilliant. But it was not an outlier brilliant compared to rest of Realm of the Elderlings. But reading the closing sequences of this book felt comparable to reading the journal of someone I actually knew. And it like, in general, I think long series achieve a unique emotional resonance, and the emptiness and fulfillment I felt upon finishing Assassin's Fate was completely and uniquely singular. This book is the changer. This series changed me, and I think it changed me for the better, and I don't think I can be changed back. And that is why it is now, and for the foreseeable future, what I consider to be the best book that I've ever read.